Today we're sitting down to talk about the weirdest video game console of all time. And you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, well, it's gotta be one of those plug and plays that you could have bought at a convenience store or on Amazon nowadays. And the answer to that is, good guess, but not quite. Today we're talking about Nokia, who decided to invest themselves in the handheld gaming market in the early 2000s to directly compete with Nintendo, of all companies, who is flat out dominating handheld gaming with the likes of the Gameboy Advance, and of course eventually the Gameboy Advance SP, the Gameboy Advance Micro, all those future iterations that just helped keep that console relevant. But Nokia was smart and thought to themselves, well, handheld gaming is a big thing right now. Cell phones are becoming more and more popular. Let's try to combine the two. And so what they came up with was this right here, the Nokia N-Gage. This is the QD model. Now, the Nokia N-Gage originally released in 2003, so it really wasn't an issue of timing that led to this console's failure. In fact, they were right there in the heart of everything where handheld gaming was at a high, they were catching it on an upswing. So what exactly did happen? Well, this system released for $300 in 2003, and it started to get mocked pretty instantaneously, being called the taco phone. But then they released what we have right here today, which is the QD model, the Nokia N-Gage QD. And this came with things like MP3 playback, radio reception, USB connectivity. But more importantly, for everyone here watching this, it also allowed you to play games. And this was an ambitious video game console, although a little bit clunky, and it had a lot of issues that we're going to highlight in today's video. So if you're new here and you're interested in more video game hardware breakdowns, then by all means, consider subscribing. We're happy to have you here. But let's take a look at Nokia's N-Gage and why exactly it's just so weird. Well, the first thing I want to highlight is it's all horizontal. That's the one thing that always stood out to me with this phone. We were in an era where everything was vertical. We were talking flip phones. You had the Envy, which would be sideways. But to have something that was laid out like a video game controller, but that you would have to hold like this for cell phone purposes, I always found that to be particularly really fascinating with the Nokia N-Gage. But this one I actually bought on eBay for about $100 and some odd for a separate video. And it was then that I learned that this had its own set of exclusives as a library to help get people to invest in the Nokia N-Gage, just like any console that's releasing for the first time does. So you can go on eBay right now if you want to look for yourselves and start investing in a physical collection of Nokia N-Gage games. There are people who really hoard these games because they're so rare. It was such a small period of time and hardly anyone's heard of them, where it's actually going in the opposite effect where very few games are expensive. So you can get things like Pocket Kingdom for a couple of bucks, or FIFA Soccer 2004 for 12 bucks, X-Men Legends for a couple of bucks, and then there's games like MLB Slam, which were only on the Nokia N-Gage for just about $20. And I always found that interesting that they were there trying to be competitive. But it's also that the one I got here actually was someone else's cell phone. So if I really wanted to be super nosy about things and go into, say, their contacts, you'll actually see right here that as it loads in, Alex, Ali, Andy, Ann, Ant, Anthony, Aisha, so on and so forth. And there was actually text messages on this thing. So this was a completely used phone as far as I was aware. But more importantly than anything are the video games. So what happens is if you go into the menu section of the Nokia N-Gage, you'll see a folder which has video games. And this one had a SIM card which had them all loaded on it. So we have Atari, Call of Duty's in here, Civilization is in here, Barakel, Elder Scrolls, FIFA 2006. They had King of Fighters on this console. I mean, there were so many different games. It's not like they didn't support it. They released it at the right point in time. I think it was just a matter of the visual design and its lack of sales and really catching fire because people weren't ready for something like that. Nowadays, it's interesting because mobile gaming on your phone, such as something like an iPhone, is actually a very common thing. And in fact, it's a very successful route to go because there's a lot of money to be made. But when you look at the Nokia N-Gage, this only sold about 400,000 units before it got booted off the market. And in 2006, the cell phone was completely discontinued. And it's also interesting because there were some technical mishaps that I think led to this phone's failure. But let's take a look at some games here, right? Because I think that's the most interesting part of all of this. One of the big problems with it was load time. So we're going to try to load up Elder Scrolls right now. And you're going to see right here, like the screen's going to go dark and we're going to wait it out. It's going to start up But this is one of those things where even the Game Boy Advance wasn't taking this long to load up games. And this was one of their calling cards. They actually signed a deal with Bethesda to get an exclusive Elder Scrolls game. And yeah, you can even see right now, it's still taking absolutely forever to load up. But this Elder Scrolls game was called Shadowkey. And Shadowkey was a game that pretty much took place directly after Morrowind. We can see it was made by Virtual Studios, which has nothing to do with Bethesda nowadays. They're not even in business anymore, but it's finally loading up. And what's really interesting about this is that you can create your own character. There's a bunch of different classes you can pick from here, like the Nightblade, the Knight, the Rogue. You can pick your own race, just like an Elder Scrolls game. So we'll do a high elf. You can choose your gender, male or female. We'll make our name H just to keep things nice and simple here. You fire back up. You start your game. There's a loading screen, but then you'll be kind of surprised to see that this is more so than anything a direct sequel to Morrowind, one of the most popular video games that came from Bethesda in 2003. And honestly, I always found it really impressive that in this tiny device here, this 4x3 screen, we had something like a first-person open area, I wouldn't say open world, Elder Scrolls game. But once it really gets rolling, you'll start to see what happens with the controls that holds back the Nokia N-Gage. Because it's almost not even the technical stuff like the load times. You can kind of see here we got the game running, and they make use of the Morrowind soundtrack. But things like here, it says press 5 to continue. And even now, as I press away at it, it's not even gonna work. And there we go. And as you can see, we're loaded in. We're playing the game, but it's running at like probably 4 FPS. And this is what really held this game back. And the entire console is you could play games by all technicality. You could play Elder Scrolls, but you better be prepared to be waiting for even borderline moving would take forever. We're trying to move forward here. You can see just how choppy it is, moving left to right. It's fascinating that it even is existing on this system, but overall it doesn't matter if it doesn't play. So that's just one example. There's other ones that I could show you like Call of Duty, but it's effectively the same story every time. The game barely runs, but it's amazing that it has its own library, and something like Elder Scrolls Shadowkey, Bethesda never repurposed into re-releasing somewhere else, or something like the MLB Slam games never came to other systems. They just sat there on the N-Gage. There were companies that were effectively all in on the N-Gage and saw an opportunity there because of the way that they were trying to target cell phone users and handheld console users. So effectively what they were saying was, hey, all you have to do is carry one device instead of putting your handheld like a Game Boy into one pocket and your cell phone like the Envy into your other pocket. But otherwise, what I also found really interesting about the N-Gage is, of course, cell phones back then really needed a SIM card for everything. And since they don't really sell these at retailers anymore, I had to buy a dummy SIM card to bypass the security for the phone and actually get into some of the menus for the game. And so when we go back here, you'll see there's a little bit of paper hanging out here. And that's because if we go underneath here, yep, that's right, we got some paper towel in here. This was a trick that I had to use from online because this is the SIM card here. And you can see, this is one of the problems with the phone, is that it was a little finicky. They tried to cut costs where they could. So this SIM card had to be touching down like this. And the only way sometimes you could do that was by putting this paper towel down here, pushing it down a little bit, adding some extra pressure. So when you slid in your battery pack, it would create that extra pressure. So when you put the cap on top afterwards, it would really squeeze things down a lot more. And this made it where the phone would actually turn on and not give you any problems like it did give me for a long while. But there were forum threads from way back when highlighting this is a major problem with the phone. So all in all, I appreciate that the Nokia N-Gage exists. It's just a really cool piece of history to own. And there's so many different ways you can get it where you don't even have to buy a physical collection. There are memory cards with all the games loaded on it like you've seen here with this phone. But there's also physical collector's items that you can get. And I've seen them even at my local game shop before where I'm like, whoa, they're selling N-Gage games here. It's for extremely hardcore collectors because as you saw there with Elder Scrolls Shadowkey, it's not the most ideal thing to play. But beyond that, that's all I have for you today on the weirdest video game console of all time. What do you think of the Taco phone? Let me know in the comments down below. Again, if you're new here, consider subscribing. We're going to be taking a look at a lot of old hardware here on this channel. And until then, I'll catch all of you very soon. Peace out.